If you're just joining us, please go to menti.com and use the code 5700266, what you see in front of your screens. Go ahead and answer the poll question. I'll add another 30 seconds. We have a few more folks joining us as they are trickling in. If you're just joining us, just go to menti.com, enter the code that you see on the screen. So we're going to talk about value streams, why value streams are important, discuss some characteristics of value stream. For some of you who are in the transformation space, this might be a quick refresher. For others who are just getting introduced to value streams, this could be net new information. We'll also briefly touch about mapping value streams, the current state to the future state, and how SAFe provides guidance on aligning the release trains. Some of you have already heard this term, over to value streams, and ultimately have a quick look at budgeting value streams. So starting from the basics, it represents a series of steps that an organization uses to implement solutions that provide a continuous flow of value to a customer. You think about an event that triggers the flow of value. It could be a customer purchase order, it could be a new feature request. And what that leads to is a series of steps, a series of actions that happen, converting input into an output at each step, ultimately delivering value to the end customer. If you take an example of, say, a consumer loan, where you have a prospect coming to your website and entering, looking at the various loan options, picking a specific loan that fits their need, and filling in an application. Once they hit the submit button, that data goes into the system. Your back office applications kick in, they start to process the application. You probably run a credit check, maybe appraise the property, and through checks and balances at some point in time, the loan is underwriters write the loan and it's dispersed to the customer. So very quickly, we've kind of mapped a bunch of steps leading from the time a customer or a prospect submits the information, places a request to your organization, and how you fulfill that request. The customers could receive a product or a service or any kind of feature or enhancement request. So here's a look at different types of value streams. Now, you might think that the value stream, just the way it's been laid out, it's no more than an end-to-end process diagram. It definitely starts out like that. As you can see on the screen, when a prospect submits information, there are various channels that are engaged. You get a rate code, etc. But it's no more. It's not just an end-to-end process. You have various applications and systems that are supporting each process step identified, also included in the definition of value stream. And then Scaled Agile framework provides guidance on differentiating the operational value stream different than the development value stream. So if you think about the steps and the people and the applications that deliver end user value that are in production, they constitute the operational value stream. If you think about the steps and the applications that are designing newer business solutions that are ultimately utilized by operational value streams, that constitutes your development value stream. In other words, the operational value streams, the people that are maintaining those value streams would keep the business running. The development value streams, would create enhancements, release net new products or services, and you would have teams that follow the defined build, test, and release cycle. This time I'll also ask if you have specific questions or if you have any comments, please do post them in the chat channel. You can find that in the MS Teams application. If you're joining via web or by the desktop application, you can hit the chat window and type in the question there. So let's do some brainstorming. Let's think about possible benefits of a value stream. I'm going to bring back the Mentimeter window and ask you to submit to this next poll question. If you go back into menti.com, type in the same code, it should now show you a question that says, what are benefits of value streams? So think about the definition that we've just talked about. What might be a benefit of the value stream? Some of these are fairly straightforward. I think the end-to-end process model or that statement kind of gave away the first one, where it provides a bit more holistic thinking. The trigger and delivery of value points to connecting with the customer, connecting to the customer. You want to connect and get their user requirements, and then finally get some feedback when value is delivered. One of the less obvious ones is that it is an effective tool for new hires. The holistic thinking and the objective nature of value stream points to that direction. New hires can quickly look at an operational value stream and fairly easily get the lay of land, understand the flow of information, as well as areas of the gaps that might exist or the impediments, and it gets them in a position where they're very quickly able to hit the ground running and start contributing right away. It does drive continuous improvement. I see a lot of people voted for that, which is very true. And that's where we start talking about the concept of defining the current state and utilizing that on a periodic basis to foster improvement. And every time you're able to eliminate a gap or reduce the lead time, you've a step closer to improving, and you're on that continuous improvement journey. So value streams are a perfect tool to continue to revisit this as technology changes the landscape, as we get more and more acquainted with newer tools and services. Value streams are a very effective way of aligning yourselves to the latest and greatest in terms of technology, in terms of services that you provide. Fantastic. So let's keep moving. Some of the benefits, and I think most of you picked it up. It provides a clear line of sight to the customer. It's a visual mapping of work, not just the current state, but the future state as well. It drives continuous improvement, effective tool for new hires. So how do we start to capture this information? Start with the basics, start to define what a value stream would look like, a name, a description, what kind of customers are you targeting, how do you qualify those customers? Identify a trigger, that initial action that kicks off the steps, such as a prospect visiting your website, and the value that customer is really truly looking for. Here's an example of the consumer banking loan application, and I started to put this together and also started to capture the current state. The values are all made up. The metrics that you look at for every single step, it's all made up, but it's meant to demonstrate how you could easily draw up a value stream current state map. We have a trigger that kicks off the process. They go in and get a quick rate quote, complete the loan application, go through the motions. The value that you truly get out of creating this current state map lies in the metrics. Now, almost all of the information here for each process step It's gathered by having a discussion with the stakeholders and the team members who are truly involved in that process. And we'll go through this in the next slide where we discuss each and every metric that we use to capture the current state. Ultimately, our aim is to try and reduce the time to market. If you can do that from the time a customer places a request till the time they get value out of it, you're on your way to beating your competition and retaining your customer. So I'll come back to this slide. I know there's a bunch of information in here, but let me just zoom in a little bit into one of the process steps. So let's take this one, for example, completing the loan application. As we've gone through identifying each process step, our next action is to document the process time, which is the actual time taken to complete a task and transform an input into output. And in addition to that, we also want to capture the lead time, elapsed time, which includes the wait time from the moment work is made available to an individual until it has been completed and passed over to the next stage or next person or next team. So in this example, as you can see, it takes only a day to complete the loan application, but apparently there's a bit of wait time built into it, which indicates that the lead time is about 10 days. This also, I think in very simple words, it also indicates there's an opportunity for improvement. In addition to that, we also want to capture the quality aspect, which is demonstrated by the percentage complete and accurate step. How many times did you have to go back a step or multiple steps because you needed the input to be corrected or if there was some clarification needed on that input? The percentage CNA depicted in the percentage format indicates the number of instances you had to go back. Now, if it was at 100%, it meant that every time this process step would have an input, it would be complete and accurate for the team or person working on the step to convert it or transform it into the output. In this example, it stands at 50%, which means that half of the time the input coming into the step requires clarification or correction, which in turn adds rework and it adds more time for the process to complete. In other words, the quality isn't up to par and there's a lot of scope for improving the quality. I see a bunch of questions here, so I'm going to go back to the chat window and see if I can answer them right here. Zishan asks, does the operational value stream contains IT operations or infrastructure support as well, or that falls more on the development value stream? That's a very good question. I think you're really hinting at the DevOps aspect of it, and the landscape has changed a bit. In that terminology, I've seen enterprises have started to look at development teams, not just as teams that would develop a service or a product and hand it over to operations. More and more, those development teams are having resources that would also support the product or service they're creating. So those lines are getting hazy as we start to embrace more of the DevOps functionality and as more and more automation gets built in. And Bobby mentions, I think those would be part of the development value stream, wouldn't they? Yeah, it's the gray area. Traditionally, it used to be operational value stream, and you would have a really clear line of demarcation. But with the advent of DevOps and the automation built in, that line and that gray area is starting to expand. I agree with Scott saying depends on how your organization is structured. Absolutely right. That is absolutely the case. Remember, the current state of value stream will change depending on how you start to embrace these newer agile practices. And if you're starting to invest more in DevOps and automation, your value stream could look a lot different from what it looks today. 6 months down the line, you may be able to eliminate some steps and optimize your teams to, really truly kind of merge the two together. It is important, I would say here, just to clarify, spend a little bit more time on this. It's important to have the demarcation between the development value stream and the operational value stream, precisely because the nature of work for operations is different than development. Operations prefer stability. You don't want your systems to start to behave in a manner that isn't prescribed. Right? The inputs and outputs have been defined. You would want the systems to continue to behave over and over in the same manner. Development, by its very nature, wants to create change based on the request coming in from the customer. So nature of work, both for development and operations, is different. And thereby, conceptually, we want those value streams to remain different. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about this process step. These are the three metrics that we start to document. And again, percentage CNA isn't a calculated measure. It is just the number of times you have to go back a step or multiple steps, although it is represented as a percentage. Once we've done documenting metrics for each of these steps, we'd add them up, get to a total lead time, a total process time, and compute an activity ratio, simply indicating the total percent time divided by the total lead time. And as you can see, 0.156 or 15.6% activity ratio leaves a lot of room for improvement. If you were able to reduce the lead time even by 10 days, that activity ratio is going to go up a lot. Finally, the quality component of each process step is compounded, and we have a rolled percentage CNA indicating a 10.18 percentage complete and accurate. In simple terms, what percentage CNA rolled up indicates that only a little bit more than 10% of the time, an item that is entering the value stream passes through the value stream without a hitch, without going back one step or a previous step, which in this case is really terrible, which indicates close to 90% of the time there's some amount of rework involved or some amount of going back one step or multiple steps. So you want to place a bit of focus on the percentage CNA, which means the quality factor needs a lot of work here. So if I take you back to the previous slide and you start to look at it at a high level, you can see how the percentage complete and accurate, as well as the activity ratios, paint a lot more objective picture of a process that was fairly simplistic to begin with. So this is our current state of value stream. Now let's talk about how do we map this to a future state. As you go through identifying areas of improvement, especially impediments or gaps where you feel you could get the biggest ROI, you would start to embrace some lean methodology, agile practices, invest some time and money in infrastructure automation, and even look at a continuous delivery pipeline. Wherever you decide to focus your attention, you just make sure that you're thinking about the what that needs to be changed, not necessarily the how. The how always comes in later when you start to go deeper into details, but at least defining these, we call these as Kaizen bursts, the starry icons. It helps to accentuate your current state map and really calls out the future state, how it would look like. In SAFe, we also aligned release trains to value streams. In other words, teams that are supporting these applications, these are good candidates for creating an agile release train, which is a virtual organization that supports the delivery of value. So you may have teams that are spread across geographically, some teams in US, across various time zones, some teams in Asia, and you would simply just draw up the circle, figure out how your organization is structured, and get them together in a virtual hierarchy. Finally, we talk about budgeting value streams. And this is a fairly recent concept. Not a whole lot of enterprises have started to apply that. And it does involve change to a level and to a unit in the organization that isn't necessarily geared to embrace that kind of change. It's always hard to have your financial department, your budgeting department be part of the change. And once you start to think about budgeting value streams, your project management office also gets involved. Traditionally, our budgets are around projects, and there's a notion of bringing people to work. I'm sure most of you or almost all of you are familiar with the definition of a project and how we go through the motions of creating a charter, having some amount of money being allocated to that. And then we get into a situation where we start to track the EVM metrics, and it gets us into a situation where it ultimately leads to finger pointing if you don't deliver by the time or if you end up needing more money. When SAFE looked at this age-old problem, they thought about all the items that have been happening, all the results that they've seen in the industry, and applying some critical and innovative thinking to that, came up with the concept of lean budgets. Lean budgets allow you to focus the budgeting on a fixed time frame and make sure that you use the concept of participatory budgeting. We actually have a 3-day class that is focused all around that, which is lean portfolio management. But instead of funding projects as the basic unit of work, we now want to fund value streams, which are inherently supported by Agile release trains. So thereby, now instead of bringing people to the work, instead of first defining a project charter and then looking for a team, now you already have a team, and in SAFE parlance, you have a team of teams, which is your Agile release train, and you also know the fixed cadence that this train operates on, which would be, a 2-week or a 3-week sprint, depending on the duration you've identified in your organization, and a 10 to 12-week PI, which is the program increment. So now you've figured out the cost that you would have to spend, you'd have to incur for this Agile release train. The time is defined in a fixed duration. You have a fixed time and fixed cost. The question now remains, how much work can this Agile release train accomplish? So if you start funding value streams, you have a much more objective view into how your money is being spent, given the principles of Agile, structured around transparency and creating a safe environment so that folks don't feel insecure about their work, and also creating Agile teams that are cross-functional and self-organizing. You're creating an environment where the focus shifts from trying to finger point and now creating a sense of security with your release trains. The focus has moved to how much work can we truly get done? How much quality work can we truly get done? So by empowering your release trains, empowering the value streams, you've now lowered the overhead. Nobody's talking about how much money you're going to need. There's no change request process in play because every 2 weeks you're going to be able to demonstrate something and get for the next 2 weeks. In every PI, you're planning for that 10 to 12 week period. So you've reduced the overhead. You've got the together mindset. There are no budget surprises. There's a lot of visibility in play. And you start to create a rinse and repeat motion. And everyone gets the hang of it after a couple of iterations and a couple of PIs. The morale goes up. People have an understanding of how the process works. So there's a lot of benefits of starting to budget your value streams. And I want to maybe throw in one other slide here that talks about guardrails, which will allow your value streams to operate with guidance, both from a strategic perspective, as well as balancing the initiatives on growing the business as well as running the business. I'm just touching the surface of budgeting value streams here, but there's a 3-day class that's focused on this concept that covers and goes into a great amount of detail. As I was mentioning earlier, you've got a fixed cost per PI. And let's say an instance where feature 1 and 2 were planned for this program increment, but during the execution part, perhaps it was discovered that the estimates provided for that feature were not up to par, which in terms required more work, more time for this feature. And by that, it would not get done by this PI. So what needs to happen is you could essentially complete feature 1, delay the feature as necessary. It'll go back into the prioritization method, prioritization scheme. And if it makes the cut for the next PI, you'd pick up the feature 2 and execute on it. The process tells you exactly what needs to happen in any given scenario. And that takes away the finger pointing and the blame game. And it then creates a safe environment. If there are any other questions, be happy to field those. Please do reach out to us at info@10agile.com. And just before we end, I'd like to mention each participant today gets a discount to our courses and classes that are posted on 10agile.com. Make sure you avail those opportunities. And as always, thanks again for participating and making this an interactive session. Thank you and have a good night.